I gave them everything. My savings, my hands, my heart. I built that guest house behind their home so I could be close, so I could feel needed. They called it mine, promised it was forever. But when I came back from the hospital, the locks were changed. No warning, no goodbye, just a note taped to the door that said, "Find a nursing home." I slept in my truck that night and the night after. 10 days passed. Then I returned. Not with tears, but with the truth. They thought they were done with me. But they didn't know, I never gave that house away. Before I go any further, I just want to thank you for sitting with me tonight. Whether you're watching this from your kitchen table on a quiet evening, or maybe tucked under a blanket just trying to rest your heart, I want you to know, I see you. What happened to me might sound too cruel to be real, but it is. And if you're still here listening, maybe a piece of you has been through something too. Maybe not exactly the same, but close enough to leave that hollow feeling in your chest when someone you trusted turned their back. If you've ever poured love into a place, into people, only to feel like you were thrown out the moment you became inconvenient, then you already understand more than words can say. I don't know your name, but I hope you'll stay with me. Not just to hear the rest of what happened, but to remember that silence doesn't mean weakness, and walking away doesn't always mean giving up. If any part of this touches something in you, I hope you'll tell me below. Tell me your story, or just say, "I'm still standing." That's more than enough. My name is Claire and I'm 68 years old. I've lived long enough to know that the most beautiful parts of life are rarely loud. They're quiet things, soft hands, morning coffee shared in silence, the way someone remembers how you like your toast. I had that kind of life with my husband Gerald. 42 years we were married. He wasn't a man of many words, but his love spoke in action. Every creaky floorboard we fixed together, every corner of our home told a story only the two of us could read. We didn't chase big dreams, we just built a quiet life that held us gently. When he passed, the silence got heavier. I kept his chair by the window. I couldn't bring myself to move it. I still talked to him sometimes, just out loud, like he was listening. Maybe he was. I had some money set aside, enough to carry me for a while, but that house we'd shared was too full of memories and too far from family. So I made a choice. I decided to move closer to my son, Matthew, and his wife, Lena. They'd always said they wanted me nearby, especially now that Gerald was gone. And I wanted that too. I wanted the sound of voices in the kitchen again. The laughter of company. Even if I was just on the edge of it. I wasn't asking to be in the middle of their lives. I just wanted to be near. The idea came up in passing. Why not build a little guest house in the backyard? Lena called it, "your little sanctuary." And that word made me smile. It felt like a place where I could grow old with some peace, maybe plant a small garden, knit by the window. I put in $120,000. That was most of what I had. I didn't see it as a risk. I saw it as love, as trust. They told me it was mine, always, that I'd never have to worry, that I'd never be alone again. And I believed them. I stood in that guest house before the walls were painted and ran my fingers over the raw wood, imagining where I'd hang my curtains, where Gerald's photo would go. I thought, this is where the next chapter starts. Safe, loved, home. They promised it would be mine, for good, forever. And when someone looks you in the eye and says that, you believe them. You want to. At first, everything felt warm. They'd come by the guest house in the evenings, drop off little meals, ask how I was sleeping. Lena even helped me hang up some curtains. Matthew set up my television and said he was glad I was finally close. And for a little while, I believed we were settling into something good. I'd sit out on the little back porch with my tea, listening to the hum of their lives just a few steps away. I didn't need to be in their way. Just hearing their voices, the clatter of dinner plates through their window, it gave me comfort. It felt like family. But slowly, that warmth started to thin out. I began to notice things I didn't before. There were hushed conversations in the main house that would stop when I walked in. Lena's tone changed, less patient, a little sharper. One day she said, offhanded, that the house was feeling crowded lately. I remember smiling, not sure if it was a joke. I wanted to believe it was a joke. But it stayed with me, like a splinter under the skin. Matthew stopped coming by as much. When I'd knock just to say good morning or bring over some fresh muffins, he'd barely make eye contact. He always looked like he had somewhere else to be. And that's when I started to feel it. That invisible wall that rises between people when they've already decided something they haven't yet told you. I didn't want to be suspicious. I've never liked that feeling. But something had shifted. I could feel it, like the air changing before a storm. Then came the day I had a dizzy spell. I was standing by the stove, stirring a pot of soup, and the room just tilted on me. Nothing too serious, but enough to make me sit down. Lena insisted I go get checked out. Said she'd already called a clinic she trusted. Matthew added that it would only be for a few days. Just rest, just observation. 3 days, they said. Just a little checkup. I packed light. A few books. My reading glasses. The photo of Gerald I kept by my bed. I folded my favorite blanket and brought it too, just in case the clinic felt too cold. I even left a little list on the kitchen counter of things I wanted to do when I got back. Trim the roses, finish that scarf I'd been knitting. I locked the guest house behind me with the same gentle motion I'd used every day, never imagining that I wouldn't be turning that key again. Because I didn't know. I didn't know it was goodbye. I came back from the clinic on a quiet morning. The sky was overcast, not stormy, just gray enough to feel like something was waiting to happen. I remember holding my small bag in one hand and Gerald's photo pressed to my chest with the other. I was tired, more emotionally than anything else, but I was looking forward to slipping back into my little space, making a cup of tea, maybe opening the windows to let in the fresh air. I missed my routine, missed the stillness of my chair by the window, missed feeling like I was somewhere that belonged to me. As I walked down the driveway, I noticed something odd right away. The curtains I had just put up last month were gone. The ones with little stitched vines. I blinked, thinking maybe they were in the wash. Maybe Lena had taken them down for cleaning. But when I stepped up to the door and turned the key, it wouldn't go in. I tried again, more carefully this time, thinking maybe I had the wrong key. But no, it was the right one. I knew it by touch. The metal was worn down where my thumb always pressed. And still, it didn't fit. I stared at that doorknob like it might explain itself. Then I stepped back and saw something taped to the center of the door. A white piece of paper, flapping a little at the edges from the breeze. The tape wasn't even secure. It was like they hadn't bothered to press it down all the way. I pulled it off gently, as if I already knew it would hurt. The words were typed, not even handwritten. "We've decided we need the space. Please consider a nursing home. We hope you understand." I didn't understand. I stood there holding that piece of paper, reading it again and again, as if maybe the words would change the second time, or soften by the third. But they didn't. They stayed cold and final. The house was silent. The curtains inside had been replaced with new ones. Thicker, closed. I knocked once, lightly, still not ready to believe what was happening. No answer. I knocked again, louder. Nothing. Not even the sound of feet. Not even the sound of their dog, who used to bark when he heard my steps. Just silence, the kind of silence that doesn't invite you in. I looked at the paper again. Folded it once, slowly, and tucked it into my coat pocket. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I didn't want to leave it behind. I stepped back from the door, stared at the windows, then down at the concrete I had once swept every week. I didn't cry. Not then, not yet. There's a moment in betrayal when the pain hasn't caught up to you yet, when you're just floating above the hurt, waiting for it to find you. That was me, standing there with my bag in one hand and no home to walk into. I walked back down that driveway with no clear idea where I was going. My feet moved, but everything else in me felt stuck. I made it to the edge of the property, where my husband's old pickup was parked under the tree, right where I'd left it before going to the clinic. It was an old thing. Rust forming around the edges, the kind of truck that had more stories in its seats than most people had in their whole lives. The moment I opened the door, the smell hit me. Leather worn down with time, a trace of pipe tobacco that still lingered in the fabric, and something else I couldn't name. Something like memory. I slid into the driver's seat slowly. It creaked the way it always did. That sound had once annoyed me, but now it felt like the only familiar voice I had left. I sat there for a moment with the door still open, letting the wind brush over my arms, holding that folded paper in my lap like it might fall apart if I let it go. Then I shut the door. The click echoed louder than I expected. I didn't know what else to do, so I just sat there. The sun had already dipped, leaving everything in that hazy bluish light that makes even the sharpest things look soft. I reached for the coat behind the seat, Gerald's old brown one, and wrapped it around me. It still fit, still smelled like him. Like home. I tucked my legs up as best I could, leaned my head against the window, and tried to breathe through the tightness that had settled in my chest. There was no plan. No backup. No one I wanted to call just yet. I could have picked up the phone, maybe dialed an old friend, but I didn't want to explain anything. Not when it was still this raw. Not when I hadn't even made sense of it myself. I didn't want anyone's pity. I didn't even want comfort. I just wanted understanding, and I wasn't sure who could give me that. So, I sat behind the wheel in the silence while the night crept in around me. I stared at the house for a long time, the one I used to be welcome in. The one that now held the lights of people who had turned me away. I watched the windows glow. I wondered if they were sitting down for dinner, if they were laughing, if they had even once thought about how that note would land in my hands. I wondered if guilt ever reached them, or if they were too busy justifying it to feel anything at all. And then, in that quiet space where my breath fogged the glass and my fingers clutched the steering wheel, I asked myself the question I never imagined I'd have to face. How do you go from being someone's mother to being in their way? How do you become an inconvenience to the very people you gave your best years to? I didn't cry. Not out loud. But something inside me shifted. Like a door slowly closing that had been left open too long. I pulled Gerald's coat tighter around me, leaned back, and let the truck cradle me through the night. I didn't sleep much, not really, but I stayed. Wrapped in silence, wrapped in questions, wrapped in a kind of grief I hadn't met before. A grief that didn't shout. One that just sat with you and waited. The third night was colder than the ones before. The wind had picked up, and it crept in through the thin edges of the truck's windows, finding its way under my coat no matter how tightly I wrapped it around me. My joints ached from sitting in that position too long, and the stiffness in my back had settled into something that made every movement feel like a quiet protest. I was just starting to close my eyes, trying to quiet my mind for a while, when I heard it, a gentle tap on the passenger window. Not loud, not sharp. Just enough to stir me from that still place between exhaustion and thought. I turned and saw her standing there in the dark, holding a thermos in both hands. Ella. She lived across the street, had for as long as I'd known Matthew and Lena lived in that house. We'd spoken here and there, waved on mornings when we crossed paths, maybe exchanged a few words over holiday decorations. But we were never close. Not the kind of close that shows up after midnight with hot coffee and eyes full of concern. I rolled the window down slowly, and before I could say anything, she passed the thermos through the opening and said, without any greeting or pity in her voice, "You look like you could use something warm." Her tone wasn't nosy. It was steady, the way someone speaks when they already know more than you've said out loud. I took the thermos, wrapped my hands around it, and felt the heat spread through my fingers. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't have to. She just stood there a moment, then said, "You didn't give them a home, you know, you gave them shelter. But they don't know what a home is. Some people don't. They think walls and windows are the same as love." She exhaled slow and long, like she'd seen something like this before, maybe lived her own version of it. I didn't respond right away. I was still holding the thermos, still trying to decide if I wanted the coffee or just the comfort of holding it. Ella glanced at the house, her mouth tightening a little, then looked back at me. "Come in," she said. "You don't have to sleep out here again. I've got an old quilt and a couch that still remembers how to be kind." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to go in, but because part of me still felt frozen in place, like I had to prove I could endure this on my own. But then I saw the look in her eyes and I realized this wasn't pity. It was recognition. And that's what broke the wall I'd built around myself. I opened the door, slowly climbed out, and followed her across the street. Her living room smelled like cedarwood and something faintly sweet, maybe apples or cinnamon. She handed me a thick blanket and set the kettle on, saying nothing more than, "Make yourself comfortable." We sat in her kitchen, quiet at first. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. I looked around at her little shelves filled with old books, porcelain birds, and framed photos that held stories I hadn't heard yet. Then she turned to me and asked a question that stopped me cold. "Claire, do you still have the deed to the guest house?" I blinked, my mind taking a moment to catch up. "The deed?" I repeated, unsure if I'd heard her right. She nodded. "You never transferred it, did you? I mean, not legally. You still have it, don't you?" I swallowed hard, suddenly remembering where I'd tucked it away months ago, in the fireproof box under the bed. I hadn't thought of it in all this mess. I hadn't needed to, until now. "Yes," I said slowly. "Yes, I do." And something shifted right then. Not loud, not dramatic. But something inside me straightened. Ella didn't smile, not exactly. But her eyes settled on mine with quiet certainty. "Then you're not done yet," she said. "Not by a long shot." The next morning, Ella made coffee strong enough to wake the truth out of a grave. She handed me a mug and said, without asking, "We're going for a little drive today." I didn't protest. There was something about her presence that made me feel less like a victim, and more like a person who had simply forgotten her own strength for a while. She didn't fill the air with talk, just hummed softly to the radio as we made our way down the county road. The sun peeking through the trees like it, too, was starting to believe in second chances. We pulled into the county building just after it opened. The clerk behind the counter looked surprised when Ella walked in like she'd done it 100 times before. She leaned over and whispered to him with a familiarity that told me this wasn't her first trip here. Then she turned to me and said, "Give him your name, the address of the guest house, and let's pull what's ours." I stepped forward, my voice a little shaky. Gave the man my name, the street, the city. He tapped away at his computer for a moment, then walked into the back. I stood there holding my breath, clutching my bag like it might help me stay upright. A few minutes later, he returned with a thin manila folder and handed it to me with a nod. I opened it slowly, unsure of what I was even looking for. But then I saw it. My name, clear as day, listed as the owner of the property. That little guest house, the one I built behind their house, the one I slept outside of in the cold, it was still legally mine, the primary residence, never transferred. No signatures, no handover, no permission given. I stared at the paper, my heart doing something between relief and rage, and I whispered without thinking, "They never even asked me to." Ella glanced at the document over my shoulder, then leaned back with a slow, knowing breath. "Of course they didn't. They counted on your silence. They counted on your love keeping you too quiet to notice." Then she smirked. Not cruelly. Just with the kind of quiet power that women like us only show when we know we're about to stand up after being pushed too long. "Well, then they're squatting," she said plainly. "Let's call someone who knows the law." We stepped back out into the parking lot, and she pulled out her phone without hesitation. Dialed a number from memory. "Ruth," she said when the line picked up, "you still carry that badge, even if it's collecting dust on your wall?" She chuckled softly at whatever was said next, then added, "Good. I've got a situation that needs someone with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense." After she hung up, I asked gently, "Ruth?" Ella nodded. "Old friend of mine, used to be a sheriff's deputy before retirement, knows her way around a court order and won't blink twice at your son or his wife if they try to sweet-talk their way out of this. We're not going back alone, Claire. Not this time." The wind picked up slightly as we stood there, papers in hand, sunlight warming the concrete beneath our feet. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a woman who'd been left behind. I felt like a woman who was walking toward her home, with truth in one hand and something sharper than anger in the other. Justice. Not loud, not bitter, just steady. Ruth met us at Ella's kitchen table that same afternoon. She wore plain clothes, but carried herself like someone who still had her badge stitched into her bones. Her handshake was firm, her eyes steady, and when she sat across from me, she didn't offer condolences or pity. She simply said, "Tell me everything." And I did. Every word. From the guest house plans to the note on the door. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, nodding now and then, the way people do when they've heard 100 stories like yours, but still believe yours matters just as much. When I was done, she opened her folder, made a few calls, and within an hour, we were sitting in a small law office just outside town. The lawyer she brought in was quiet but efficient, printing out documents with the kind of certainty that doesn't leave room for doubt. They gathered every detail. The deed, my name, the timeline. The lawyer filed for a court order while I sat in a worn leather chair with my hands folded in my lap, the weight of the past week settling into something solid beneath my ribs. At one point, the lawyer turned to me and asked, "Do you want them charged or just removed?" I didn't answer right away. I stared down at the edge of the table, tracing the wood grain with my finger. Then I looked up and said, calm and clear, "I'm not going back for revenge. I'm going home." The court date was set, but with the paperwork and Ruth's signature, we didn't need to wait long. She explained what would happen next, how they'd approach, how they'd serve the papers, how I'd walk back in with the law behind me. I nodded through it all, taking in each word like stepping stones across a river I was finally ready to cross. That night, back at Ella's, I packed my bag. Not much, just what mattered. I folded my clothes with care, tucked in the photo of Gerald that had stayed beside me through every night in that truck. And at the very end, I opened a small velvet box and slid my wedding ring back on. I hadn't worn it since the move, not because I stopped loving him, but because something about that new place had made me feel like I had to let go of who I was to fit into someone else's world. Not anymore. I stood in front of the mirror, the ring catching the light, and took one long, steady breath. My shoulders relaxed, my spine straightened. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. I built that home with love, I whispered to my reflection, not looking away. Now I'll walk into it with strength. And that was the truth. Not a threat, not a promise. Just the truth. The kind you carry in your bones when you've been quiet long enough, and the world is finally about to hear what silence has been holding. We pulled into the driveway just before noon, the sun casting long shadows across the lawn I used to trim myself. The house looked the same, at first glance. Same windows, same front porch, same wooden steps I used to sweep every Sunday. But as we rolled in, everything about it felt different. Like the walls themselves knew something was about to shift. I sat in the passenger seat beside Ruth, steadying my breath, my hand resting lightly on the bag in my lap. Behind us, the lawyer followed in a separate car, briefcase in hand, ready to see this through. I saw movement at the window. First Lena, then Matthew. They looked out, expecting, I don't know what, maybe just another delivery, maybe a neighbor. But when they saw me, and saw I wasn't alone, everything stopped. The curtains didn't close, but their faces did, and still, I didn't move. I waited until Ruth opened the door and nodded at me. Then I stepped out onto the gravel, my shoes crunching softly beneath me. Ruth walked up the path first, firm and measured, her badge clipped neatly to her waistband, even though she no longer needed to wear it. The lawyer walked beside her, quiet but present, a paper in his hand that held every answer they hadn't thought I had. I stood a few feet behind them, not hiding, not towering, just there, rooted. The front door opened slowly. Matthew stepped out first, followed by Lena. His mouth opened like he wanted to greet me, maybe explain something quickly, something rushed and convenient. But Ruth didn't give him the chance. She lifted the court order and her voice at the same time, calm and clear. "Ma'am," she said, looking directly at Lena, "you are currently trespassing on Miss Claire's legally recognized residence. You have 10 minutes to gather your things. We will supervise the process. No damage to the property will be tolerated." Lena's face turned pale. Her lip trembled. She looked from Ruth to the lawyer to me, then back again, her hands gripping the sides of her sweater like they might hold her together. Matthew stepped forward, eyes wide, voice cracking a little. He said my name once, then said it again, this time softer. "Please," he started. "We didn't think, it wasn't supposed to go like this." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My silence had already said what years of conversation never could. I stepped to the side to let them pass, and as they walked past me, I reached into my bag and pulled out something I had folded carefully that morning. A soft gray blanket, the one I used in the truck. I held it out to them without a word. Lena stopped, confused. Matthew looked down at it, then back up at me. I placed it gently in his arms and said, "It gets cold out here." That was it. No anger, no raised voice, no final speech, just truth, wrapped in fabric, handed to the same hands that once locked me out. I turned away then, not out of cruelty, but because I had already given them enough of my time. Enough of my heart. Now it was time to give something to myself. Ruth stayed behind to supervise the exit. The lawyer handled the details, and I walked back toward the guest house with the keys that never should have left my hand. This time, when the door opened, it didn't feel like something was being taken away. It felt like something was finally being returned. I stepped through the doorway slowly, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to feel it. Every inch of that space I had once called my own. The air was still, and the room held that dry quiet you only find in places left untouched for too long. A thin film of dust had settled on the table where I used to keep my basket of yarn. My slippers were still by the bed, neatly placed where I'd left them, as if they too had been waiting for me to come home. The chair by the window was just as I remembered. The cushion sagged a little on one side, shaped to my body from years of quiet mornings with a book, or just watching the world outside. I ran my hand across the armrest, then across the wooden table beside it, where Gerald's photo still sat. They hadn't moved it. Maybe they didn't notice it. Or maybe they couldn't bring themselves to touch what wasn't theirs. Either way, it was there, his face looking out at me, warm and steady, like he'd been holding the space for me until I returned. I crossed the room and opened the windows wide. The hinges creaked a little, resisting at first, then surrendering with a gentle groan. The breeze rushed in, soft and cool, carrying the scent of cut grass and early afternoon sun. Curtains fluttered, dust lifted, and with it came a kind of stillness I hadn't known in days. Not silence like before. Not the kind that sat heavy on my chest, but a quiet that made room for breathing again. I turned on the kettle, the old one with the chipped handle that I'd brought from my first home. As it warmed, I moved through the space slowly, placing things back into their rhythms. A folded throw on the couch. A book laid open to the last page I'd read. I didn't speak. There was no one to speak to. But I felt full, not empty. Present, not forgotten. When the kettle whistled, I poured the tea, let it steep, and brought it to my lips with both hands. The heat sank into my fingers, the scent rose into my nose, and for the first time in what felt like 100 hours, I felt grounded again. I carried it to the window, sank into my chair, and let my body go soft. I wasn't reclaiming bricks. I wasn't reclaiming wood or floors or windows. I was reclaiming breath. I was reclaiming the right to sit in peace, to feel the breeze on my skin without wondering what would be taken next. And for the first time in days, I rested. Not just my body, but the part of me that had been holding on so tightly. I closed my eyes. I didn't sleep. I just rested. With the windows open, the light pouring in, and my name still on the deed. It had been a few weeks since that day. The days moved slower now, but not in a bad way. More like everything had returned to a rhythm that belonged to me. I tended to the little garden out back, sat by the window in the mornings with my tea, folded my laundry with no rush, no noise outside my walls that wasn't invited. The house no longer felt like a wound. It felt like skin that had healed, tender in places, but whole. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. The number flashed on the screen, and I knew it before I picked up. I waited for the second ring, then the third, before answering. His voice came through quiet, unsure, the kind of voice someone uses when they're not ready to face the full weight of what they've done. He asked how I was, said he hadn't known it would go that far, said he and Lena were overwhelmed, stressed, didn't think it would feel like that to me. Then there was a pause, followed by a sentence he must have practiced. He said, "I'm sorry." I sat there holding the phone to my ear, listening to the static of his breath, and I answered as gently as I could without letting him off too easy. I said, "I hear you, but you didn't just change locks, you changed what we were, and there's no key for that." There was another long silence, a small exhale. Then he said my name again, softer this time, like he was searching for a door that didn't exist anymore. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't scold. I simply said, "I hope you find your peace," and hung up. Not out of anger, but because I knew I didn't need to carry his guilt to feel better. That was his burden now. A week or two later, a letter arrived. Neatly folded, pale blue envelope. I recognized Lena's handwriting before I even opened it. It was formal, but apologetic. She wrote about regret, about reflection, about wishing things had gone differently. There were no excuses in it, and I respected that. But still, as I held the letter in my hands, I knew there was nothing I needed from it. I didn't feel relief, I didn't feel warmth. I felt still. I folded it back neatly, returned it to its envelope, and slid it into the drawer beside my bed where old things go when they no longer need to be spoken about. Some things break quietly. Not with shouting, not with slammed doors, but with silence. And sometimes that's how they stay. It doesn't mean I hate them. It doesn't mean I want them to suffer. It means I've learned to stop bleeding for people who watched me hurt and looked away. I've stopped waiting for the knock on the door that says, "We were wrong." Because the only door that matters now is the one I walked back through. And it still opens for me. Every time. If they've ever made you feel like a burden, listen to me, you're not. You are not too much, not too old, not too soft. You just gave your love to people who didn't know how to hold it, and that's not your shame to carry. I used to think a locked door was the end of something. But now I know. It's the beginning of boundaries. The kind that protect your peace instead of waiting for someone else to respect it. If you've ever built something with love, only to be pushed out of it, I hope you'll tell me below. Or just write, "I'm building again." That's enough, that says everything. Please subscribe if you've ever had to walk away to reclaim your worth. And if you're watching this alone, this light, it's for you. See you on the next video.